Laura adjusted her worn blazer and stared at the crumpled invitation in her hand. She sat on the edge of her tiny studio apartment's bed, the inked letters gleaming under the weak sunlight streaming through her one unwashed window. "The Rowan Auction House cordially invites you," it read, but the words felt foreign. This was an invitation for the elite, art dealers, collectors, and magnates. Yet, it had arrived for her, someone who was neither powerful nor influential. 6 months ago, she had been a rising star in the art world, working as a curator at the prestigious Whitmore Gallery. A wrongful accusation of mishandling funds had cost her the position and her reputation. She had fought to clear her name, but the damage was done. Now, her days were filled with freelance cataloging jobs, scraping together enough for rent while trying to keep her love for art alive. The Rowan Auction House was legendary, not just for its rare treasures but for its enigmatic owner, Mr. Rowan, a man whispered about in art circles but seldom seen. The invitation promised access to some of the world's rarest artifacts, and perhaps, a chance to regain her footing in the art world. Still, doubts lingered. Why her? Who had sent this? As she folded the invitation and slid it back into the envelope, her phone buzzed with a message from her best friend, Amelia. "You need to go. Forget what those people think of you. You deserve to be there." Laura sighed. Amelia meant well, but the thought of stepping into a room filled with those who had once adored and now despised her was suffocating. Yet, a part of her burned to prove them wrong. She straightened her back, glanced at the chipped mirror, and whispered, "One night. I can handle one night." The auction house stood at the end of a long, cobblestone driveway, its towering spires piercing the dark evening sky. Laura's taxi pulled up to the grand entrance, and she hesitated before stepping out. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns ascended the marble steps as staff with white gloves opened the massive oak doors. She tightened her grip on her modest clutch, suddenly feeling out of place. Inside, the grandeur was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting light on walls adorned with priceless artworks. It was a world she had once dreamed of belonging to, now one that seemed determined to reject her. She noticed familiar faces, art dealers, curators, and collectors. Among them was Charlotte Evans, her former college rival, laughing beside a group of men as she cradled a glass of champagne. Charlotte's eyes landed on Laura, and her smirk deepened. She sauntered over, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Laura. Didn't expect to see you here. I thought this was an event for professionals." Her voice dripped with mockery, loud enough to draw attention. Heat flushed Laura's face, but she refused to look away. "Good to see you too, Charlotte," she replied coolly before stepping past her, heart pounding. The auction hall was a cavernous space with rows of velvet-covered seats facing a stage. Laura took a seat at the back, hoping to avoid further encounters. The room buzzed with anticipation as the first lot was unveiled, a 17th-century jade statue, starting at $500,000. Paddles shot up immediately, and the price climbed higher with each bid. As Laura watched, an older man in a janitor's uniform caught her eye. He stood near the side exit, his gaze fixed on the stage with an intensity that seemed out of place. When he noticed her looking, he gave a slight nod and disappeared behind the curtains. Something about him unsettled her, but before she could dwell on it, the room erupted in applause. The statue had sold for $1.8 million. The next item was unveiled, a painting shrouded in mystery, covered with a black cloth. The auctioneer's voice grew hushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the piece de resistance of the evening. The Widow's Veil, an oil masterpiece from an unknown artist, rumored to carry a curse. Starting bid, $2 million. Gasps echoed through the room as the cloth was removed, revealing a hauntingly beautiful portrait of a veiled woman. As the bidding began, Laura's curiosity deepened. The painting seemed familiar, its brushstrokes reminiscent of an artist her late father had admired. Her father, a struggling painter, had spoken of a lost masterpiece with a tragic history, though she had assumed it was merely a story. "Are you bidding?" a voice whispered beside her. Startled, Laura turned to see a man in his mid-30s, dressed sharply but with a warmth in his eyes that stood out among the cold stares in the room. "I'm Elliot," he said, offering a hand. She shook it hesitantly. "No, I'm just observing," she replied. Elliot smiled. "Smart choice. This crowd can be cutthroat. But sometimes, the best opportunities come when you least expect them." Something about his demeanor was disarming, and for the first time that evening, Laura felt a sliver of comfort. Laura found herself restless as the bidding for the widow's veil surged past $4 million. She glanced toward the side exit, where the janitor had vanished. There was something about his piercing gaze earlier that unsettled her. Acting on instinct, she slipped out of her seat and followed the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the dimly lit corridor. The janitor was crouched by a crate, fumbling with a padlock. He jumped when he saw her. "You shouldn't be back here," he said, his voice hoarse. Laura hesitated but pushed forward. "That painting, it feels familiar to me." "What do you know about it?" He studied her for a moment, then shook his head. "You don't want to get involved with that painting. It's more than art, it's a trap. And if you're not careful, you'll end up like the others." His cryptic words only deepened her curiosity. "The others?" she pressed. But before he could answer, the distant sound of approaching footsteps made him stiffen. "I've said too much," he muttered, retreating down the hall and disappearing into the shadows. Laura stood frozen, her heart pounding. What had she just stumbled into? Returning to her seat, Laura noticed Elliot watching her with mild curiosity. "Sneaking off already?" he teased, but she ignored him, her focus back on the painting. The bidding was nearing $6 million when something caught her eye, a faint, almost imperceptible mark in the lower corner of the canvas. It looked like a signature, partially obscured by the veil in the painting. Her breath hitched. It was unmistakably her father's initials. Her hands clenched the edges of her seat as a wave of emotions flooded her: confusion, disbelief, and an unshakable need to uncover the truth. Just as she resolved to investigate further, Elliot leaned closer. "You're interested in that painting, aren't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Let's just say I have a hunch about it," she replied carefully. He smiled knowingly. "Sometimes, hunches are worth acting on. If you're willing to take a risk, I can help." Elliot's offer lingered in Laura's mind as the auctioneer's gavel struck, signaling the sale of the painting for $6.2 million. The winner was a sharply dressed man sitting at the front, who received congratulatory nods from the crowd. Laura's heart sank. She had lost her chance to uncover the mystery. But Elliot surprised her again. "I happen to know the buyer," he said, his voice low. "Let me see what I can arrange." Before she could protest, he had slipped away. Moments later, she saw him approach the winning bidder, their conversation animated but friendly. Laura fidgeted, unsure whether to hope or despair. Elliot returned with a grin. "The painting's yours, temporarily, at least. I convinced him to let you study it for a few days. Don't waste this opportunity." Laura's mind raced with gratitude and suspicion. Why was he helping her? What did he stand to gain? That night, Laura brought the painting to her apartment, setting it carefully on her easel. As she examined the initials in the corner, her hands trembled. Memories of her father teaching her to identify authentic brushstrokes flooded back, making her chest ache. Her father had spoken of a piece he restored during his apprenticeship, an oil painting of a veiled woman that had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Could this truly be the same work? And if so, how had it ended up in an elite auction decades later? She ran her fingers along the frame, searching for clues. Her fingertips brushed against something rough, a hidden compartment. With a small screwdriver, she pried it open, revealing a folded piece of parchment. Her heart raced as she unfolded it, revealing a cryptic note. To those who seek the truth, the widow's veil is both a warning and a key. Its secrets are tied to the life it destroyed. Proceed with caution. The next morning, Laura arrived at the Rowan house to return the painting and request more time to study it. As she approached the reception desk, Charlotte's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Well, if it isn't our charity case." Laura turned to see her rival standing with a group of associates, her smile venomous. "Heard you've been poking around the painting," Charlotte sneered. "Hoping to find some hidden fortune to rebuild your life? Newsflash, people like you don't belong here." Humiliation burned in Laura's cheeks, but before she could respond, Elliot appeared at her side. "People like her have more integrity than you'll ever understand, Charlotte," he said sharply. His defense silenced the group, and Charlotte's smug expression faltered. As tension subsided, a hush fell over the lobby. Mr. Rowan himself entered, his presence commanding yet enigmatic. Dressed impeccably, he seemed to exude both wealth and sorrow. He glanced briefly at Laura, his eyes lingering as if he recognized her. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I've heard you're interested in the widow's veil. Perhaps we should talk." Laura's breath caught as she nodded, following him into a private office. Inside, Rowan gestured toward the painting, now displayed on an easel. "This piece has a history intertwined with my family, and, it seems, with yours. Tell me, Miss Hayes, how far are you willing to go to uncover the truth?" Seated in Mr. Rowan's dimly lit office, Laura felt a mix of intimidation and anticipation. The walls were lined with towering bookshelves, their contents seemingly untouched for years. Rowan's piercing gaze settled on her as he poured a glass of amber-colored whiskey, offering her one. She declined with a polite shake of her head. "You've stumbled onto something quite personal," Rowan began, swirling the liquid in his glass. "The widow's veil is more than a painting, it's a testament to betrayal, loss, and, perhaps, redemption. It belonged to my late wife, Evelyn." His voice softened as he uttered her name. Laura leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What happened to her?" she asked hesitantly. Rowan hesitated, his jaw tightening. "She died under questionable circumstances. This painting was all that remained of her. For years, I've sought answers, and now you've found something, this note. Tell me, Miss Hayes, do you truly want to know what lies beneath its surface?" Rowan's admission stirred something in Laura, memories of her father surfacing. "My father was an artist, a restorer," she confessed. "He worked on a painting like this one decades ago. He told me stories about a masterpiece that brought misfortune to everyone who touched it. I never imagined it could be real." Rowan studied her intently. "Your father, then, may have known Evelyn," he said, his tone contemplative. "She believed this painting was cursed. She claimed its existence drew out the worst in people, jealousy, greed, obsession. I dismissed it as superstition, but after her death, I began to wonder. Laura shivered at his words, the weight of their shared connection settling over her. If this painting has caused so much pain, why keep it? She asked. Rowan's lips curved into a faint smile. Sometimes, the things that haunt us are also the things that hold us together. The truth has a way of demanding to be found. Later that evening, Laura returned to her apartment with the painting. She couldn't ignore the parallels between Rowan's story and her father's cryptic remarks years ago. Determined to uncover more, she scoured the note for clues, finding a faint watermark beneath the text, a symbol she recognized from an old art restoration manual her father had owned. Flipping through the worn pages of the manual, she found the symbol marked beside a restoration technique rarely used anymore. It involved layering translucent paint over hidden elements to obscure them from plain view. Laura's pulse quickened. Was there something hidden beneath the widow's veil? She set to work carefully peeling back the layers, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. Hours later, the faint outline of another figure began to emerge, a man, his face twisted in anguish. Laura gasped. This wasn't just a painting, it was a layered narrative, and it held secrets that someone had tried desperately to conceal. The next day, Laura hurried to the Rowan house to share her discovery, clutching the note and photos of the hidden figure. She barely stepped through the grand entrance when Charlotte intercepted her, her expression venomous. Still playing detective, I see, Charlotte sneered, blocking Laura's path. Whatever you think you've found, it's irrelevant. You're wasting everyone's time. Laura sidestepped her, determined not to be derailed. But Charlotte wasn't finished. In a calculated move, Charlotte loudly accused Laura of tampering with the painting, drawing the attention of nearby staff and guests. "This woman doesn't belong here," she shouted. "She's just a disgraced curator trying to claw her way back." Humiliated, Laura could feel the judgmental stares piercing her. But before she could respond, Rowan's commanding voice echoed across the room. "Enough." He strode toward them, his sharp gaze silencing everyone. "Miss Hayes is my guest. Anyone questioning her credibility will answer to me." In Rowan's office, Laura revealed the photos of the hidden figure and the note's watermark. His expression darkened as he studied them. "I had my suspicions," he murmured. "But this confirms it. Evelyn wasn't the only victim." This painting ties back to an art theft decades ago, one that ended in bloodshed. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. Why would anyone hide this? And why layer it into the painting? She asked. Rowan set down the photos, his eyes grave. "To protect the thief's identity, I suspect. And to obscure the truth about Evelyn's death." He stood, pacing the room. "We're out of time for speculation. I'll need you to present this discovery at the next auction session. We must bring the truth to light, no matter the cost." Laura hesitated. "And if it exposes the wrong person?" Rowan met her gaze, his expression unyielding. "Then we face the consequences together." Elliot found Laura in the gallery later that evening, her thoughts weighed down by Rowan's ultimatum. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he joked lightly, but his tone softened when she didn't respond. "What happened?" Laura hesitated before explaining everything, her father's connection, the hidden figure, and Rowan's demand. Elliot listened intently, his brow furrowing. "This isn't just about a painting anymore," he said. "It's about power. And trust me, in places like this, power is dangerous." He leaned closer. Be careful, Laura. If you expose the wrong person, you'll make enemies you can't afford to have. Laura's nerves were raw as she walked the halls of the Rowan auction house the following morning. The gallery's walls seemed to close in, every framed masterpiece a silent witness to the weight she carried. The hidden figure in the widow's veil wasn't just a discovery, it was a fuse waiting to be lit. Elliot approached her with a folder in hand. "I did some digging," he said, lowering his voice as they stepped into a quiet corner. "That watermark you found, it's tied to a private restoration firm that closed down 20 years ago. Guess who used their services?" Laura's heart skipped a beat. "Rowan?" Elliot nodded grimly. "And several other high-profile names, including Charlotte's family." Laura's breath hitched. "What does this mean?" she whispered. "It means we're walking a tightrope," Elliot replied. "This painting might expose more than just a crime, it could bring down some very powerful people." Summoned to Rowan's office again, Laura found him seated by the fireplace, the flames casting sharp shadows across his face. He gestured for her to sit, but she hesitated, sensing the tension in the room. "I owe you the truth," he began. "The man in the painting, he was Evelyn's lover before we married. I knew of their history, but I believed it was over. I was wrong." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "The night she died, she'd planned to meet him. The details were never clear, but I suspect their meeting was orchestrated to end in tragedy." Laura's pulse quickened. "Do you think someone murdered her?" Rowan's gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. "I've always believed it. And now, with what you've uncovered, I may finally get the answers I've sought for years." Meanwhile, Charlotte was seething. Watching Rowan defend Laura in front of the entire auction house had humiliated her. She couldn't let this newcomer disrupt the delicate balance of power she had worked so hard to climb. Over glasses of champagne with a few trusted allies, Charlotte began to lay out her plan. "Laura thinks she's clever, but she's reckless," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with venom. "If she wants to play with fire, let's make sure she burns." Her associates nodded in agreement, their loyalty rooted in shared ambition. Charlotte knew she couldn't afford to make a mistake. Laura was digging too deep, and if she uncovered the truth, it wouldn't just ruin Charlotte's reputation, it could destroy everything. As the evening approached, Laura returned to the gallery to study the painting one last time. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, her every step echoing ominously in the vast, empty space. She knelt before the widow's veil, her flashlight tracing the faint outline of the hidden figure. Something glinted faintly beneath the layers, something metallic. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the surface. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the silence, a crash, followed by hurried footsteps. Laura spun around, but the gallery was empty. Her flashlight beam darted across the room, catching only shadows. Whoever had been there was gone, leaving her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, Laura awoke to find her apartment door ajar. Her stomach dropped as she stepped inside. Papers were scattered across the floor, her laptop smashed. The photos she had taken of the hidden figure were missing. Panic surged as she called Elliot. "They've taken everything," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone doesn't want me to expose the truth." Elliot arrived within minutes, his face pale with worry. "You need to leave," he urged. "Stay with me until this blows over." But Laura shook her head. "No. If I back down now, they win. I can't let this painting story stay buried." Not after everything. Elliot stared at her for a long moment before nodding. Then we fight, he said. The final night of the auction arrived, and tension hung heavy in the air. Guests filed into the grand hall, their excitement barely masking the undercurrent of unease. At the center of it all stood the widow's veil, its haunting beauty drawing every eye. Laura took her place beside Rowan, who had insisted on introducing her as the evening's guest speaker. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her hands trembled at her sides. As she stepped onto the stage, the crowd murmured in surprise. Laura took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke. "This painting is more than a work of art," she began. "It's a testament to lives lost, secrets kept, and the lengths people will go to protect power." Before Laura could continue, Charlotte rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Enough of this nonsense," she snapped. "This woman is a fraud, desperate for attention." Rowan stood, his presence silencing the room. "Miss Evans," he said, his tone icy. "If you have something to say, say it with proof. Otherwise, sit down." Charlotte faltered, her confidence wavering under the weight of his glare. But Laura wasn't finished. "Miss Evans isn't just afraid of the truth, she's tied to it," Laura said, her voice steady. "Her family's name appears in the same records as this painting's restoration. They have as much to lose as anyone if its secrets come to light." The room erupted into whispers as Charlotte sank back into her seat, her face pale. Laura continued, her voice carrying over the noise. "The hidden figure in this painting reveals a story of betrayal and greed, a story that connects to Evelyn Rowan's death." She unveiled the photos she had managed to salvage, passing them to Rowan. He studied them in silence before turning to the crowd. "This auction house was built on integrity," he said firmly. "If there's been wrongdoing, it will be uncovered, no matter the cost." Charlotte's associates exchanged nervous glances. The balance of power was shifting, and they could feel it slipping from their grasp. The air in the auction house grew tense as Rowan's words reverberated through the hall. Laura stood silently at the podium, her gaze fixed on the crowd. She could see the discomfort in Charlotte's allies as the weight of the revelation began to sink in. But it wasn't over yet. Rowan's voice carried an edge as he addressed the crowd. "The painting's hidden figure isn't just a clue, it's a witness. A man connected to Evelyn's past and to those who orchestrated her death." He paused, letting the words hang. "And those who knew this truth have hidden it for decades, profiting while others suffered." Charlotte stood abruptly, her composure shattered. "This is absurd. You have no proof," she shouted. But Rowan raised a hand, silencing her. "Sit down, Miss Evans. We're far from finished." He gestured to Laura, urging her to continue. Laura hesitated before speaking. "When I discovered the hidden figure, I didn't fully understand its significance," she began. "But the evidence points to one conclusion: someone used this painting to mask a crime. A crime that Charlotte's family played a part in covering up." Charlotte's face turned ashen. "That's a lie," she screamed. "You're just a disgraced curator trying to ruin me." But before Laura could respond, Elliot stood. "Enough, Charlotte," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're only making it worse." He turned to the crowd. "I've seen the evidence myself. Laura isn't lying." The room fell into stunned silence as Charlotte's desperate attempts to deny her involvement unraveled. Finally, she slumped into her seat, defeated. After the crowd dispersed, Rowan led Laura and Elliot into his office. The doors shut behind them with a heavy thud. "There's more to this than just Charlotte's deception," Rowan said, pouring himself another drink. He opened a drawer and retrieved a leather-bound journal. "This belonged to Evelyn," he said softly. In her final entries, she mentioned fearing for her life. She believed someone close to her wanted the painting destroyed to erase evidence of their crimes. Rowan handed the journal to Laura. As she skimmed the pages, a pattern emerged. Evelyn had uncovered a smuggling operation tied to high-profile art restorations, implicating Charlotte's family and others. "She died trying to expose this," Laura murmured. Rowan nodded. "And now, thanks to you, the truth is finally out." The next morning, Laura awoke to a knock at her door. To her surprise, it was Elliot. He looked tired but resolute. "Rowan asked me to deliver this," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside was a formal offer to head the Rowan auction house's new restoration division. Laura's breath caught. "This is incredible," she said, her voice trembling. "But why me?" Elliot smiled faintly. "Because you earned it. And because Rowan knows you'll uphold the integrity of the work." But the offer came with risks. Accepting it meant immersing herself further in a world rife with deception and power plays. Was she ready for that? Charlotte's downfall was swift. Within days, her family's connections to the art smuggling ring were exposed, leading to public scandal and criminal investigations. The Rowan auction house cut all ties with her, and her reputation in the art world was irreparably damaged. Laura couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy as she read the headlines. Charlotte's ambition had driven her to destroy others, but it had ultimately destroyed her as well. Elliot found her reading the news in the gallery. "Do you regret it?" he asked. Laura shook her head. "No. The truth needed to come out. But it's a harsh reminder of what ambition can do when unchecked." Weeks later, Laura stood in the newly refurbished restoration wing of the Rowan auction house. The painting The Widow's Veil hung on the far wall, its hidden figure now fully revealed, a testament to the truth and the lives it had impacted. Rowan entered, his expression softer than Laura had ever seen. "You've done remarkable work," he said. "Evelyn would have been proud." Laura smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Thank you," she replied, "for trusting me." As she left the gallery that evening, she felt a sense of closure. The journey had been painful and fraught with challenges, but it had also given her a new purpose. She had reclaimed her place in the art world, not through deceit or ambition, but through resilience and integrity. And as she walked into the night, Laura knew that her story was only just beginning.